While I lay unconscious in the ICU fighting for my life, my parents quietly sold my house, my jewelry, my entire existence, as if I was already gone. But they had absolutely no idea about the hidden door behind my kitchen pantry, and what I kept inside would destroy their lives the moment I opened my eyes. My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. I work as a forensic accountant investigating financial fraud for a living. I have spent my adult life uncovering lies and tracking missing money. I never expected the biggest deception to come from my own blood. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you the most. The first thing I registered was the mechanical beeping of a heart monitor echoing through the sterile room. It was a rhythmic, piercing sound, synchronizing with the pounding ache inside my skull. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt coated in dry sand. Heavy bandages wrapped tightly around my chest, and my left leg felt entirely immobilized. As I forced my heavy eyelids open, blinding fluorescent lights assaulted my vision. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind as fragments of memory violently flashed behind my closed eyelids. The blinding glare of oncoming headlights on the interstate, the deafening crunch of metal twisting and tearing, the feeling of weightlessness right before my car flipped. I focused all my remaining strength on keeping my eyes open. I was in a hospital room alone. There were no flowers on the bedside table, no worried family members sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl chair in the corner. Just the cold hum of medical machinery and the distinct smell of antiseptic cleaner. I tried to lift my right arm, managing to raise it a few inches, recognizing the intravenous lines taped securely to my pale skin. The heavy wooden door slowly pushed open. A middle-aged nurse wearing blue scrubs walked in holding a digital tablet. Her name tag read Carla. She kept her eyes glued to the screen as she approached my bed, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. She reached out to check my pulse oxygen monitor, and that was when I forced my dry vocal cords to work. Where am I? My voice was nothing more than a ragged croak, but it sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Carla gasped loudly, dropping her tablet onto the floor with a sharp clatter. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with absolute horror as she stared at me. Her hands flew to her mouth as if she had just seen a ghost rise from the grave. "You are awake," she whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "This is impossible." "Water?" I managed to say, pointing a shaky finger toward the small plastic pitcher on the tray table. Carla scrambled to pour me a small cup of water, helping me guide a straw to my parched lips. The cool liquid felt like a miracle sliding down my burning throat. As my vision cleared completely, I noticed that Carla was not smiling. There was no joy or relief in her expression. She looked terrified, her chest heaving, as she glanced frantically between me and the medical chart hooked to the end of my bed. "How long have I been here?" I asked, my voice sounding a little stronger now. "Where are my parents, Harrison and Diane?" Carla swallowed hard, taking a step back from my bed. "Naomi, you have been in a medically induced coma for exactly 3 weeks. You suffered severe trauma in a multi-car collision. The doctors were not sure you would ever wake up." 3 weeks. I processed the timeline, my mind racing to calculate the missed workdays, the unread emails, the life that had been suspended while I lay unconscious. "But where is my family?" I pressed, feeling a sudden knot forming in my stomach. "Why am I alone in this room?" Carla looked down at her hands, avoiding my gaze entirely. Tears pooled in the corners of her eyes, making my own anxiety spike. "Naomi, I do not know how to tell you this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Your parents, Harrison and Diane, they just left the hospital about an hour ago." "Okay," I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Please call them back. Tell them I am awake." "You do not understand, Naomi." Carla interrupted, her tone desperate and urgent. "Your parents had a meeting with the hospital ethics board yesterday. They presented legal documents declaring that you were practically brain dead. They said you would never want to live this way and that there was zero hope for your cognitive recovery. A cold chill radiated from the center of my chest, spreading outward to my fingertips. What are you saying, Carla? They signed a do not resuscitate order, Naomi. They brought in a power of attorney. They authorized the chief of medicine to remove your life support systems. The procedure is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. They were just here to say their final goodbyes. The air vanished from the room. I could not breathe. My own parents, the people who had brought me into this world, had just legally condemned me to death. They had signed my death warrant while my brain was actively healing, while I was fighting my way back to consciousness. They had looked at their living, breathing daughter and decided to pull the plug. Get my phone, I demanded, rising in a panic. Carla shook her head, tears spilling over her cheeks. Your mother took your wallet and cell phone. She cleared out your locker, claiming she needed to prepare for your funeral. I was trapped, but they had no idea I was awake, calculating their audit. The hours ticked by in agonizing slow motion. I convinced Carla to keep my awakening a secret from the hospital administration for just one night. She was terrified of losing her job, but the sheer horror of my parents' actions convinced her to buy me a few hours of silence. The intensive care unit plunged into the quiet rhythm of the night shift. I lay perfectly still, listening to the steady hum of my own breathing. I needed information. I needed a way out. Just after midnight, the heavy metal door to my hospital room suddenly clicked open very softly. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep. Footsteps approached my bedlight and hesitant. A warm hand gently touched my shoulder. Naomi, a deep, familiar voice whispered, "Please tell me you are still with us." I opened my eyes and the breath caught in my throat. Standing over me was Terrence, my brother-in-law. He was an incredibly talented architect, a hard-working African-American man who had the misfortune of marrying my sister Sydney. My parents treated him like an accessory to parade around when it suited their image, and a financial burden when it definitely did not ever. Terrence. I rasped, my voice still incredibly weak. He practically collapsed against the side of my bed, his broad shoulders shaking with sheer relief. Thank God, he breathed out, wiping a hand across his tired face. I knew something was wrong. I knew they were hiding something from me. He checked the hallway before closing the door firmly. I sat up slightly, wincing against the sharp pain in my ribs. Terrence, what is happening? Why did my parents sign a do not resuscitate order? Why did they tell the doctors I was brain dead and gone from this world completely? Terrence pulled up a chair and leaned close. His eyes were dark with exhaustion and intense anger. They are broke, Naomi. Harrison is completely bankrupt. His construction company went under 2 months ago and he has been hiding it from the investors. And Sydney? He shook his head, his voice thick with profound betrayal. My wife has maxed out every credit card we own. She is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They are drowning in debt, and they saw your car accident as a convenient way out of their massive financial problems right now at this very moment. My mind raced, processing the data like a forensic ledger. How does my death solve their bankruptcy issues? Terrence pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket. Because they forged a power of attorney document. 2 weeks ago, while you were in the deepest part of your coma, Harrison brought a shady lawyer into the hospital. They used a fake signature and a bribed notary to claim full control over your medical decisions and your financial assets. They boldly told everyone you had a severe brain injury and that you would never wake up to stop their malicious plans. They stole my identity. I whispered the reality of their crime, settling over me. Terrence nodded grimly. It is worse than that, Naomi. Diane went to your house the day after the accident. She packed up everything. Your designer bags, your electronics, your entire jewelry collection. She sold it all to a private broker for cash. They have been liquidating your life piece by piece to keep Harrison's creditors at bay and to fund Sydney's massive shopping addictions. I have been watching them funnel stolen money into offshore accounts for days now, without them knowing about my surveillance. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was completely staggering. My own mother had walked through my home boxing up my personal belongings while I was fighting for every breath in a hospital bed. They did not see a tragic accident. They saw a massive financial windfall. But my house, I said, tightly gripping the bed rails. They cannot just sell my property without my physical presence or a huge legal review. Real estate transactions always take time. Terrence looked at me, his expression grim. They expedited the process, Naomi. They found a cash buyer willing to bypass inspections. I stared at Terrence, feeling the cold sting of adrenaline rushing through my veins. You have to understand, Naomi. He continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I only found out about this entirely wicked scheme yesterday. I saw an email on Sydney's laptop from a real estate attorney. When I confronted her, she told me to mind my own business. She said your accident was a tragedy, but the family needed to survive. She actually called it a blessing in disguise. My own sister, I muttered, feeling the bitter taste of profound deception inside. Terrence gripped my hand tightly. I came here tonight to gather hard evidence. I was going to go to the police tomorrow morning. I could not let them murder you, Naomi. I could not stand by and watch them pull the plug just to cash a check. You are the only person in that family who ever treated me with basic human respect. When Harrison called my architecture firm a joke, you helped me secure my first commercial client. I owe you my professional career, and I owe you my absolute loyalty until the very end today. Thank you, Terrence, I said. But we cannot go to the police yet. They will use the forged power of attorney to tie this up in court. Harrison has corrupt connections. I need absolute leverage. I need to catch them selling my assets. Terrence nodded, understanding perfectly. He unlocked his phone and swiped to a photo. Then you need to see this flyer. He turned the screen toward my face. The red text read, Exclusive open house, tomorrow afternoon, cash buyers only. They are selling your home, he explained quietly. The buyer brings a check tomorrow at 3. If they finalize that sale, your equity disappears into offshore accounts forever without a trace. I stared at the bright red letters on the digital flyer, the words cash buyers only burning into my retinas. There was no time for tears. There was no time to mourn the parents I thought I had, or the family I thought I knew. My forensic accountant instincts, the very skills my parents had mocked for years, as boring and uninspired, instantly took over my brain. Every single emotion shut down, replaced by cold, hard, methodical calculations. If that cash buyer handed over a check tomorrow at 3 o'clock, my parents would immediately funnel the funds through untraceable shell accounts before the ink even dried. They would vanish with my life savings, and I would be left to suffocate under a forged medical order. I looked up at Terrence, my voice dropping to a sharp whisper. We have to leave right now. Tonight. If I am still lying in this hospital bed when the sun comes up, Harrison and Diane will walk through those double doors with a doctor and a legally binding death sentence. They will pull the plug on my life support, and you will be attending my funeral by Friday. We need to execute an against medical advice discharge immediately. Terrence swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the hallway. Naomi, you can barely sit up. The doctor said your injuries are severe. I cannot just wheel you out of an intensive care unit without triggering alarms. The staff will call security, and security will call your parents because of that fake power of attorney. I gripped his wrist, ignoring the sharp pain shooting up my arm. Terrence, if I stay here, I die. If we leave, I have a chance to take everything back. Go find Carla. Tell her I need the AMA discharge paperwork right now. Tell her if she helps us, I will make sure she is protected from any fallout. Terrence nodded, his jaw set with sudden determination. He slipped out of the room, leaving me alone with the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. I began carefully peeling the tape off my intravenous lines, wincing as the needles slid out of my bruised veins. I had to be ready. A few minutes later, the door swung open, but it was not just Terrence and Carla. A tall, severe-looking man in a tailored suit marched into the room, his face flushed with professional outrage. His name badge identified him as Mr. Higgins, the night shift hospital administrator. "What exactly is going on here?" Mr. Higgins demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Nurse Carla tells me you are awake and demanding an immediate discharge. This is highly irregular and completely unacceptable. You are under a strict medical hold, and we have a legally binding power of attorney on file from your parents. I am obligated to call Harrison and Diane immediately to inform them of this drastic change in your condition." He reached into his pocket for his cell phone. My heart hammered against my fractured ribs, but I forced my breathing to slow down. I needed to project absolute authority. I needed to be the apex predator in this room. "Mr. Higgins," I said, my voice eerily calm and commanding, "if you make that phone call, you will be personally named as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar federal fraud investigation by tomorrow afternoon." His hand froze halfway to his pocket. He looked at me, a mixture of annoyance and confusion crossing his sharp features. "Excuse me. Are you threatening me, young lady? You have suffered a severe head trauma. You are clearly confused and experiencing medical delirium. I am a senior forensic accountant," I stated, locking my eyes directly onto his. "I investigate corporate embezzlement and institutional billing fraud for a living." While I was lying here pretending to be asleep over the past hour, I took a very close look at the itemized treatment chart hooked to the end of my bed. I noticed several interesting billing codes. Mr. Higgins shifted his weight, his confident posture faltering slightly. I pressed my advantage, letting the professional jargon flow like a weapon. "You are upcoding my treatments," I continued, my tone sharp and unforgiving. "You have been billing my insurance for active resuscitation protocols and level 1 trauma interventions for the past week, even though I have been completely stable and simply comatose. You are unbundling standard care procedures to maximize the daily payout from my insurance provider. I know the exact federal statutes you are violating. I know the exact fines your hospital will face per fraudulent claim. If you call the people who forged a legal document to murder me, I will make sure the Federal Audit Board rips this hospital apart piece by piece, and I will ensure your name is at the very top of the indictment list." The silence in the room was absolute. Terrence stared at me in awe. Carla covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Mr. Higgins looked like the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He knew I was right. Hospitals routinely padded bills, and he knew a targeted federal audit would destroy his career. "You want an against medical advice discharge?" Mr. Higgins said, his voice completely devoid of its previous arrogance. "I want the paperwork printed immediately," I commanded. "I want it signed and filed without a single notification sent to my so-called next of kin. You will log a system error regarding the notification protocol. You will let my brother-in-law wheel me out of the basement exit right now. If you do exactly as I say, your billing discrepancies remain a secret. Do we have a deal?" Mr. Higgins swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door. He gave a stiff, defeated nod. "Carla, get the AMA forms. Print them in my office. Do not use the main terminal." 10 minutes later, I was out of the hospital gown and dressed in a pair of oversized sweatpants and a heavy winter coat that Terrence had grabbed from his car. The pain in my chest was excruciating, every breath a battle against my broken ribs, but the adrenaline fueled my survival. Terrence carefully lifted me from the hospital bed and gently placed me into a standard transport wheelchair. Carla handed me the discharge papers, her hands shaking slightly. "Good luck, Naomi," she whispered, her voice full of genuine concern. "Thank you for not calling them," I replied, offering her a small, tight smile. Terrence gripped the handles of the wheelchair. We bypassed the brightly lit main lobby, navigating through the dimly lit service corridors, just as Mr. Higgins had instructed. The smell of bleach and institutional food faded, replaced by the sharp, biting scent of freezing night air as Terrence pushed open the heavy loading dock doors. The cold wind hit my face like a physical blow, shocking my system fully awake. We had done it. We had escaped the execution my parents had meticulously planned. Terrence quickly wheeled me toward his dark SUV parked in the shadows of the service lot. He opened the passenger door and helped me transfer into the heated leather seat. As he strapped the seatbelt across my bruised chest, he looked at me, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Where to now, Naomi?" Terrence asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I looked out the window into the darkness, my mind already calculating the next phase of the war. "Take me to my house," I said coldly. "We have an open house to crash." The drive through the dark city streets was agonizing. Every pothole and uneven patch of asphalt sent violent shockwaves through my fractured ribs, but I refused to make a sound. Terrence gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale gray under the streetlights. He kept checking the rearview mirror as if expecting Harrison and Diane to suddenly appear behind us in a high-speed pursuit. I stared ahead, focusing on the route to my neighborhood. My mind processed the timeline. It was currently 2 in the morning. My parents were scheduled to authorize my death at 8. The open house for my property was set for 3 in the afternoon. We had a narrow window to secure my fortress and set the trap. Terrence turned the heavy SUV onto my quiet, tree-lined street. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was a modern architectural build with large glass panels and dark wood accents that I had purchased in full 3 years ago. When we pulled into the driveway, the security lights flared to life. Something was immediately wrong. The custom welcome mat I had bought was gone. The heavy ceramic planters that flanked my front door had been replaced with cheap plastic ferns. Terrence killed the engine and hurried around to help me into the wheelchair. The freezing air bit through my oversized coat as he rolled me up the paved walkway. I reached for the digital keypad on the front door, pressing my thumb against the biometric scanner. A harsh red light blinked back at me, accompanied by an error beep. "Access denied." My parents had already wiped my biometric data from the primary security system. They truly believed I was already a corpse. "Use the manual override," I instructed Terrence, my voice sharp. "Enter the sequence 9472 and pull the hidden lever under the handle." Terrence followed my instructions, and the heavy oak door clicked open. He pushed my wheelchair over the threshold and reached for the light switch. The foyer flooded with bright overhead lighting, and the breath violently left my lungs. My home had been completely sterilized. Every trace of my existence had been scrubbed clean. The vintage Persian rug I had purchased during a trip to Istanbul was missing. The walls, which used to display my curated collection of abstract art, were stripped bare, patched with fresh white paint. We moved into the main living room, and the visual destruction hit me even harder. My custom leather sectional and hand-carved coffee table were gone. In their place sat cheap generic staging furniture, a beige sofa, a glass table, and a fake bowl of fruit. They had boxed up my life like I was already a ghost. Terrence pushed me toward the master bedroom, and the violation grew more intense. My closet doors were wide open. Every single piece of my clothing, every pair of shoes, every handbag had been completely cleared out. My jewelry armoire, which held pieces I had spent a decade collecting, was empty. They did not just sell my house. They liquidated my personal identity. They erased me from the world with frightening efficiency. They had treated my home like a discount warehouse, pillaging everything of value to cover Harrison and his failing construction company and Sydney's endless shopping sprees. "This is completely insane," Terrence said, his voice echoing in the hollow, sterile room. He paced back and forth across the cheap staging rug, his hands gripping his head. "Naomi, they stripped you down to the copper wiring. They took your clothes. They took your artwork. They took everything you worked for." He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his fingers trembling with raw anger. "I am calling the police right now. This is a massive robbery. We are getting a squad car down here to arrest Harrison and Diane before they even wake up." I grabbed his wrist with my good hand, pulling the phone away from his face. "No, Terrence. Put the phone down right now." He stared at me in disbelief. Are you crazy, Naomi? They robbed you blind while you were in a coma. We have the evidence right here. We need the authorities. If you call the police right now, we lose everything. I explained, my tone icy and precise. You are thinking like a victim, Terrence. You need to think like a forensic accountant. If the police arrive, they will demand proof of ownership. They will run my name through the system. Do you know what will pop up on their database? The forged power of attorney. The police are not judges. They do not have the jurisdiction to invalidate a notarized legal document on the spot. If Harrison shows up with that paperwork, the police will treat this as a civil dispute. They will tell us to take it to family court. Terrence lowered the phone, his shoulders slumping. So what does that mean for us? It means we get trapped in a brutal, drawn-out legal battle, I said, outlining the grim reality. Harrison will use my own stolen money to hire a team of vicious corporate lawyers. They will drag the case out for years. They will claim I am mentally unstable from the car crash. They will tie up my assets in endless litigation while they continue to funnel the cash from this open house into their offshore accounts. By the time a judge finally rules in my favor, the money will be completely gone, and Harrison will file for corporate bankruptcy to shield himself. I will be left with millions in legal fees and a hollow victory. I just cannot let that happen. We need absolute undeniable leverage right now. Push me straight to the kitchen. Terrence silently gripped the handles of my wheelchair and navigated us out of the empty bedroom. We moved across the gleaming hardwood floors toward the back wall. It was time for absolute war. The wheels of my chair glided smoothly over the polished oak floorboards as we bypassed the stripped dining room and headed straight into the kitchen. My parents had been thorough here as well. The high-end espresso machine I used every morning was gone. The custom knife block had vanished from the marble island. Even the decorative copper pots hanging above the stove had been unceremoniously ripped down, leaving bare metal hooks protruding from the ceiling. They had pillaged my sanctuary with the frantic greed of looters. Terrence pushed me past the empty refrigerator and steered the wheelchair toward the large walk-in pantry at the very back of the kitchen. "Stop right here," I instructed him, holding up my uninjured hand. Terrence brought the wheelchair to a halt just inches from the rear wall of the pantry. He looked around the small enclosed space, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. The wooden shelves were completely bare. Diane had boxed up every single can of soup, every bag of flour, every spice jar. There was nothing left but dust outlines where my groceries used to sit. "Naomi, there is nothing back here," Terrence said, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped space. "This is a dead end. We need a computer or a phone if we are going to fight them." I did not reply immediately. Instead, I leaned forward in my chair, ignoring the sharp flare of agony in my fractured ribs. I reached out toward the blank wooden panel situated between the second and third shelves. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard beadboard backing. But I knew the exact dimensions of my own fortress. I pressed my palm flat against the center of the wood, applying pressure to 3 specific invisible pressure points simultaneously. A soft hydraulic click resonated from behind the wall. The supposedly solid wooden panel popped forward by a fraction of an inch. I slid the panel smoothly to the left. Terrence gasped, taking a sudden step backward. Recessed into the wall behind the false wood was a sleek black biometric security terminal. A glowing red scanner pulsed softly in the dim light of the pantry. "What in the world is that?" Terrence whispered, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. "That is the actual front door to my house," I replied coldly. I pressed my right index finger firmly against the glass pad. The machine chirped, confirming my print. Then I leaned my face closer to the terminal, aligning my right eye with the retinal scanner. A thin green laser swept back and forth across my pupil. Biometric profile accepted. A mechanized, synthesized voice chimed softly from a hidden speaker. "Welcome back, Naomi." Heavy industrial metallic locks disengaged with a series of loud, heavy thuds that vibrated through the floorboards. The entire back wall of the pantry shelves and all suddenly swung inward with a smooth electronic hum. Terrence stood completely paralyzed. I looked back at him over my shoulder. "Push me inside, Terrence. We have work to do." He gripped the handles of my wheelchair, his hands actually shaking, and rolled me over the steel threshold. The moment we crossed into the hidden room, the heavy blast door automatically swung shut behind us, sealing with an airtight hiss. The temperature dropped instantly, the air dry and perfectly climate-controlled by a dedicated ventilation system. The darkness of the room was quickly shattered by the sharp blue glow of massive server racks powering up. We were inside a concrete reinforced bunker measuring 20 by 20 feet, completely hidden within the architectural footprint of the house. 4 towering server racks hummed with immense digital power, their indicator lights blinking rapidly as they reconnected to my localized network. In the center of the room sat a massive multi-monitor workstation surrounded by ergonomic chairs and pristine glass desks. In the far corner, bolted directly into the reinforced concrete floor, sat a heavy, fireproof commercial-grade steel safe. Terrence walked slowly around my wheelchair, his mouth hanging slightly open as he took in the sheer magnitude of the technology surrounding us. "Naomi, what is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been back here?" "I built this room the same year I bought the house," I explained, wheeling myself toward the central workstation. My parents always loved to mock me at family dinners. They told all their wealthy country club friends that I was just a boring number cruncher. They said I lacked ambition. They said I was a low-level accountant who would never achieve the financial success of my father or the social status of my sister. They treated my career like an embarrassing hobby. Terrence nodded slowly, still staring at the blinking servers. "Sydney always said you just did taxes for local small businesses." "Sydney is a fool," I said sharply, "and my parents are dangerously arrogant." "I do not do taxes, Terrence. I run an elite multi-million-dollar forensic accounting and cybersecurity firm. I employ a team of 40 specialized analysts. We contract with federal agencies, international banks, and massive private equity firms to track stolen corporate funds, uncover offshore money laundering rings, and secure highly sensitive digital assets. My company is currently valued at $45 million, and this hidden bunker serves as the off-the-grid encrypted nerve center for my most sensitive investigations." Terrence physically stumbled back until his shoulders hit the heavy steel door. He looked at me as if he was seeing a completely different human being for the very first time. $45 million, he repeated, the massive number rolling awkwardly off his tongue. "You are worth $45 million, and you drive a 6-year-old sedan. You let them mock you every single Thanksgiving. You sat at the end of the table and let Harrison lecture you about how to build a real business. Why did you never tell them the truth?" Terrence pushed my wheelchair to the walk-in pantry at the back of the house. To anyone else, it looked like standard storage space. My parents had cleared out the appliances, leaving nothing but bare wood. They thought they had taken everything. They were completely and entirely wrong. "Stop the wheelchair right here," I instructed Terrence, pointing to the blank wall section between the second and third shelves. Terrence frowned, looking at the empty space. "Naomi, there is nothing there." "Just watch," I replied. I pressed my palm against the seamless wooden panel. I applied pressure to 3 invisible points simultaneously. With a soft click, the panel popped outward. I slid it left, revealing a black biometric scanner embedded into the reinforced concrete behind the drywall. Terrence stepped back, his eyes widening in shock. "What is that?" "My parents always mocked me for being a boring number cruncher," I said. "They told friends I was just a low-level accountant. They never bothered to understand what I actually do." I pressed my index finger onto the glass pad. A green laser swept across my pupil. "Biometric profile accepted," a mechanized voice chimed softly. Heavy metallic locks disengaged with a loud thud. The entire pantry wall swung inward, revealing a hidden server room. Blinking server racks hummed quietly, casting a blue glow across the steel-reinforced walls. In the center sat a massive fireproof safe and a multi-monitor workstation. Terrence gripped the doorframe, absolutely speechless. Naomi, what is this place? This is my real life, I answered. I do not just crunch numbers. I run an elite forensic accounting and cybersecurity firm. We track stolen corporate funds and secure digital assets for high net worth clients. My company is valued at $40 million, and this server node is completely off the grid. My parents think they robbed a mid-level employee. They actually declared war on a financial ghost. I rolled toward the steel safe in the corner. I spun the dial, entered the combination, and pulled the heavy door open. Inside were stacks of encrypted hard drives and a thick leather-bound portfolio. I pulled the portfolio out and tossed it onto the desk. "This is my arsenal," I said, opening the leather cover. Terrence leaned over, reading the bold legal print on the first page. "A revocable living trust," he read aloud. "How does this help us right now?" "They have a power of attorney. A standard power of attorney only gives them control over assets held in my individual name," I explained. "But 3 years ago, I transferred ownership of this house, my business, and my investment accounts into this trust. I am the sole trustee. If incapacitated control transfers to my corporate lawyer, not my parents. That forged document is legally worthless against a properly funded living trust. They do not realize it yet." My fingers flew across the keyboard, ignoring the pain radiating through my chest. The monitors flickered to life, displaying layers of encrypted banking portals and financial tracking dashboards. I immediately initiated lockdown protocols on all my public-facing bank accounts. "They might have stolen my physical jewelry and checking account cash," I muttered, "but they are not getting another single dime. Public accounts are now completely frozen. If Harrison tries to wire any more money, the bank will flag it as fraudulent activity immediately." Terrence let out a shaky breath. "Okay, so they are locked out of the cash. But what about the house? The open house is happening today. Can the trust stop them from selling it?" I opened a secure back channel to the county clerk's digital filing system. I had automated alerts for any legal filings attached to my property address. A bright red notification popped up on the monitor, timestamped 2 hours ago. My blood ran cold as I opened the PDF file. "Oh no," I whispered, my heart hammering against my fractured ribs. "What is it?" Terrence asked, leaning closer to the glowing screen. "They are not just hosting an open house to find a buyer," I said. "They already found one. This is an expedited deed transfer request." Harrison bribed a corrupt title agent to fast-track the paperwork. They drew up a cash sale contract for $2 million. The buyer is bringing a certified cashier's check today at exactly 3 in the afternoon. Terrence looked at his watch. "It is almost 4 in the morning. That gives us barely 11 hours. If that buyer hands over the check and the title agent stamps this deed, the house officially changes hands," I explained. "Harrison will instantly route that $2 million through an offshore shell company. Even with the trust protecting me, reversing a fraudulent property sale involving a cash buyer could take years of brutal litigation. We cannot let that happen." "So we cancel the open house," Terrence suggested. "We lock the doors." "No," I countered. "If we lock the doors, Harrison will meet the buyer somewhere else. He will rush the sale underground. We need them to walk right into this house. We need them to feel victorious. We need the buyer present so we can blow up the deal right in Harrison's face, destroying his credibility and terrifying the corrupt title agent." I began pulling up the administrative controls for the property's smart home system. Every blind, lock, and speaker was hardwired into my hidden servers. "I will turn my home into a psychological prison." Terrence watched the security camera feeds popping up on the side monitors. He looked at me, a fierce determination replacing his exhaustion. "What do we need to do?" "We prepare the ultimate trap," I said to him quietly. "We let them set up their open house. We let them smile and play the grieving parents. And right when they reach out to take that massive check, we are going to burn their entire fraudulent empire down to the ground. The clock is officially ticking right now. The clock is officially ticking right now." I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors illuminating the hidden server room. If we were going to spring a trap on my parents and the cash buyer, I needed to know exactly what they had been doing inside my house while I was lying in a hospital bed. I pulled up the primary security interface. My parents thought they had disabled my alarm system, but they only deactivated the public-facing cameras. They had absolutely no idea about the secondary network of hidden microcameras I had installed in the crown molding of every room. These were discrete high-definition lenses equipped with sensitive audio receivers, routing directly to my encrypted servers. Terrence leaned closer to the screen as I scrubbed through the timeline. "Let us see what they were doing 3 days ago," I muttered, selecting a file timestamped Tuesday evening. The video player expanded, showing my living room. The custom leather sectional was already gone, replaced by the cheap staging sofa. Sitting on that sofa were my mother Diane and my younger sister Sydney. They were holding crystal wine glasses, drinking my expensive vintage wine and laughing loudly. Seeing them so relaxed and joyful while they believed I was dying made my stomach churn, but I kept my face entirely blank. Terrence crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw clenching as he watched his wife giggling with her mother. I turned up the audio feed. "We need to make sure the lawyer gets his final payment by Friday," Diane was saying on the recording, taking a delicate sip of wine. "Harrison is completely tapped out from paying off the corrupt notary, and the hospital ethics board took a massive donation to look the other way. We cannot afford any delays with the deed transfer." Sydney waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Relax, Mom. I already wired him the remaining $50,000 this morning. He is fully paid off. The forged power of attorney is locked in tight." Diane lowered her glass, looking at Sydney with a mixture of surprise and sudden concern. $50,000. Sydney, you and Terrence are swimming in credit card debt. Your father and I know you do not have that kind of liquid cash lying around. Where did you get that kind of money without raising massive red flags? Sydney let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed through the hidden speakers. Her smile was vicious. "I did not use our personal checking account," she said smoothly. "I used the corporate accounts for Terrence's architecture firm. He just landed that massive commercial contract last month. He received a huge upfront retainer for the design phase. I have full administrative access to his business ledgers. I simply transferred the funds out and buried the transaction under a fake vendor invoice." In the server room, Terrence completely stopped breathing. I paused the video, but Terrence reached out and tapped the spacebar to keep it playing. He needed to hear everything. "Is he not going to notice that money is missing?" Diane asked on the recording, a wicked smirk starting to form on her face. Sydney rolled her eyes, taking another large gulp of wine. "Terrence is completely clueless. He spends 15 hours a day buried in his blueprints and building models. He trusts me to handle the bookkeeping. He is just a workhorse mom. A reliable blind workhorse who thinks we are building a life together. By the time his accountants figure out the retainer is gone, we will have sold Naomi's house for $2 million in cash. I will just quietly replace the $50,000 before his quarterly audit, and he will never even know I touched it." Diane laughed again, raising her glass to clink against Sydney's. "You are brilliant, darling. A true survivor. Terrence is lucky to have a woman who knows how to handle real business." I hit the pause button, freezing the image of my sister and mother smiling over their stolen wine. The silence in the hidden server room was heavy and suffocating. I slowly turned my chair to look at Terrence. He was staring at the frozen screen, his eyes wide and unblinking. The man who had sneaked into an intensive care unit to save my life. The man who had worked tirelessly to build his own architecture firm from the ground up was watching his entire marriage disintegrate into a calculated financial transaction. "Terrence," I said softly. He stepped back from the monitors, pressing his hands against his face. His broad shoulders trembled, not from sorrow, but from a terrifying cold rage. "She stole from my business," he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of the ultimate betrayal. "She stole my client's retainer to pay a corrupt lawyer to murder you. My own wife. She called me a blind workhorse, I am nothing to her but an ATM machine, an asset to be drained to save her bankrupt father. I watched him process the horrific reality. The grief in his eyes rapidly hardened into something far more dangerous. He dropped his hands, clenching them into tight fists at his sides. The gentle, accommodating architect was completely gone, replaced by a man demanding absolute justice. He turned to look at me, his gaze fierce and unwavering. Naomi, I am entirely done playing the good husband. I am done being their financial pawn. I want to destroy them. I want to rip their entire fake empire down to the foundation. What do we do next? I felt a cold smile forming on my lips. I pulled up the architectural blueprints for my house on the main monitor, highlighting the electronic locks and speaker systems. We use this house as a weapon, I replied. We are going to lock them inside with the cash buyer, and we are going to broadcast this exact recording through every speaker in the ceiling. We will let their entire world burn today. We will let their entire world burn today. The hours leading up to dawn dissolved into a blur of frantic keystrokes and cold anticipation. Inside the hidden server room, the temperature remained perfectly regulated by the cooling systems, but a different kind of chill settled over Terrence and me. We sat shoulder to shoulder in the blue glow of the monitors, tracking every digital footprint my family had left behind. Terrence used the time to pull up his own business accounts, verifying the devastating truth of Sydney's theft. The $50,000 was indeed gone masked as a fraudulent consultation fee. I spent the remaining hours mapping the smart home network, ensuring every electronic lock window shade and hidden speaker was completely isolated from external override. When the sun finally rose, casting pale morning light through the front windows, visible on my security feeds, the trap was fully set. I leaned back in my wheelchair, feeling the dull throb of my broken ribs acting as a constant reminder of why we were doing this. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy front door clicked open. The digital chime echoed softly through the house, signaling the arrival of the enemy. I touched Terrence's arm, and we both turned our full attention to the primary surveillance monitor. Harrison stepped into the foyer first, wearing a sharply tailored gray suit that probably cost more than a reliable used car. He looked around the staged living room, adjusting his expensive watch with an air of absolute entitlement. Diane followed close behind him, clutching a designer handbag and wearing a somber black dress that was clearly chosen to project the image of a grieving mother. Sydney walked in last, scrolling furiously on her phone. She wore a pristine white blouse and a perfectly manicured expression of complete boredom. They did not look like a family preparing to pull the life support plug on their eldest daughter in a few hours. They looked like aggressive corporate sharks circling a lucrative acquisition. Terrence clenched his jaw as he watched his wife casually toss her keys onto the staging table. "Is the place completely ready?" Harrison asked, his voice booming through the hidden audio receivers. "The buyer is bringing a certified cashier's check for $2 million. I want no mistakes today. I need this capital infused into my construction firm by the end of the business day, or my creditors are going to file a federal injunction against me." Diane sighed dramatically, running a hand over the cheap beige sofa they had brought in to replace my furniture. "Everything is perfect, Harrison, but we need to move fast. Do you have any idea how much that intensive care unit is billing us for Naomi's room? It is absolute robbery. Every single day she lies there attached to those machines eats into our profit margin from this house sale. We should have rushed the ethics board meeting earlier this week." The sheer callousness of my mother's complaint echoed in the small server room. She was actually annoyed that my survival was costing them too much overhead. Sydney did not even look up from her phone as she chimed in. "I do not care about the hospital bills, Mom. I just need my cut of the sale transferred immediately. Terrence is going to meet with his corporate accountant on Monday morning. If I do not have that $50,000 back in his business ledger by Sunday night, he is going to realize the retainer money is missing. I need my share wired to my private account the second the title agent stamps the deed." Harrison shot Sydney a harsh glare. "You will get your money when the offshore transfer clears, Sydney. Do not rush me." The forged power of attorney is solid, but the title agent is taking a massive risk, pushing this cash sale through without a mandatory waiting period. We have to smile, play the grieving, devastated family, and make this look completely legitimate. If anyone asks, Naomi is in a tragic, irreversible coma, and we are liquidating her estate to pay for specialized long-term care. Diane nodded, adjusting her pearl necklace. It really is a blessing in disguise. Naomi never fully appreciated this property anyway. She was always so focused on her boring forensic accounting work. She never understood how to live a life of true luxury. Now her little boring life is going to save our entire family legacy. It is poetic, really. Terrence let out a low, disgusted breath next to me. I reached over and tapped the keyboard, bringing up the front porch camera feed. A sleek, black luxury sedan pulled into my driveway. A man in a dark overcoat stepped out carrying a slim leather briefcase. This was it. The cash buyer had arrived. He walked up the paved pathway, inspecting the exterior of the house with a critical eye. He reached the front door and pressed the doorbell. The chime rang out through the house, cutting off my parents' toxic conversation immediately. Harrison straightened his suit jacket, slapping a look of profound sorrow onto his face. Diane immediately forced tears into her eyes, clutching a tissue she seemingly pulled out of thin air. Sydney tucked her phone away and adopted a solemn, respectful posture. The transformation was sickeningly flawless. They were professional predators putting on the performance of a lifetime. Harrison opened the front door, extending a warm, welcoming hand to the buyer. "Welcome, Mr. Davis," he said, his voice dripping with fake grief. "Please come in. We appreciate you moving so quickly on this transaction. As you know, our family is going through an incredibly difficult time with our daughter's tragic accident." Terrence looked at me and nodded. The cash buyer was now inside. The front door closed behind him, trapping all of them inside my house. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, ready to initiate the total lockdown sequence. The time for waiting was over. I pressed my cold fingers against the glowing digital keyboard, bypassing the security firewall. Through the high-definition monitors, Terrence and I watched Harrison lead Mr. Davis into the main living area. My father gestured expansively toward the vaulted ceilings and the large bay windows, pointing out the architectural details as if he had built the place himself. Diane hovered near the kitchen island, offering the buyer a bottle of imported sparkling water with a perfectly practiced, sorrowful smile. Sydney lingered by the staircase, tapping her manicured nails against the banister, clearly impatient for the transaction to end. "This is a magnificent property," Mr. Davis said, his voice echoing slightly in the hollow staged room. "I must admit, I am surprised you are willing to part with it so quickly. Real estate of this caliber in this neighborhood rarely hits the market." Harrison placed a heavy hand over his heart, bowing his head in a display of award-winning fake grief. "It breaks our hearts to sell it," Harrison replied smoothly, "but our Naomi is in a terrible state. The medical bills are astronomical, and her specialized care facility requires a massive upfront deposit. We have no other choice." Diane wiped an invisible tear from her cheek. "We just want what is best for our little girl," she added, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Mr. Davis nodded sympathetically, placing his slim leather briefcase onto the glass staging table. He snapped the metallic locks open and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I have the purchasing contract right here, along with the certified cashier's check for $2 million. As soon as you sign the deed transfer, the funds are completely yours." Harrison stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed as he reached for the pen. I looked at Terrence, my jaw clenched tight. "Execute the lockdown," he whispered, his voice vibrating with cold anticipation. I hit the enter key. Instantly, the house reacted. Heavy metallic clacks echoed from the front and back entrances as the motorized deadbolt slammed into place. Before Harrison could even touch the pen, the motorized blackout blinds on every single window in the house violently dropped. They slammed shut with a synchronized, terrifying thud, instantly plunging the bright morning living room into harsh shadows. The sudden darkness made Diane shriek in surprise, dropping her sparkling water onto the hardwood floor. "What the hell is going on?" Harrison shouted, dropping the pen and backing away from the table. The smart home lighting system flickered, dimming to a blood-red emergency hue that I had pre-programmed for security breaches. Mr. Davis grabbed his briefcase, pulling it tightly against his chest, his sympathetic demeanor instantly evaporating into raw panic. Sydney grabbed her phone, frantically pressing buttons. "The network is completely dead!" she yelled, her voice rising in pitch. "I have zero cellular service. The house is totally blocking the signal." Harrison rushed to the front door, yanking on the heavy brass handle. "It is locked tight," Harrison roared, rattling the handle furiously. "It will not budge. The manual override is completely jammed." Then the silence of the room was shattered. I activated the concealed surround sound system, cranking the digital amplifiers to maximum volume. The hidden speakers crackled to life, projecting crystal-clear audio from the ceiling. It was the recording from Tuesday evening. Sydney's voice blasted through the living room, crisp and undeniable. "We need to make sure the lawyer gets his final payment by Friday." The sound of her own voice made Sydney freeze in absolute horror, her face turning chalk white. Harrison's recorded voice immediately followed, booming from the speakers like a judge handing down a guilty verdict. "I am completely tapped out from paying off the corrupt notary, and the hospital ethics board took a massive donation to look the other way. We cannot afford any delays with the deed transfer." In the living room, Diane covered her ears, screaming for the audio to stop. Mr. Davis took a massive step back from my family, his eyes darting frantically around the red-lit room. He looked at Harrison like the man was covered in venom. "What is this?" Mr. Davis demanded. The recording continued, merciless and perfectly timed. Sydney's recorded voice echoed again. "The forged power of attorney is locked in tight." Diane answered on the tape, laughing cruelly. "Every single day she lies there attached to those machines eats into our profit margin from this house sale. We should have rushed the ethics board meeting earlier this week." In the server room, Terrence stared at the monitor, watching his wife crumble to the floor in pure terror. Harrison lunged for the smart home control panel on the wall, smashing his fists against the glass screen, but it remained completely dead. Mr. Davis backed up against the front door, clutching his briefcase containing the $2 million check. "You forged a power of attorney," he yelled at Harrison, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "You are liquidating a stolen property to cover up medical fraud. This is a massive federal felony. I am not going to prison for your insane family. Open this door right now." Harrison held up his hands, sweating profusely. "Mr. Davis, please, this is a misunderstanding. The system is hacked. It is a fake audio file." Mr. Davis sneered. "Open the door or I am breaking a window." I tapped a single key, disengaging the heavy deadbolt on the front door only. It clicked open loudly. Mr. Davis did not hesitate. He shoved past Harrison, threw the door open, and sprinted down the paved walkway toward his luxury sedan. "You people are utterly insane," he screamed back at them from the driveway. "I am calling the authorities the second I have a signal. The deal is dead." He threw his briefcase into his car and sped away, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I locked the front door again, trapping my parents and sister inside their worst nightmare. I locked the front door again, trapping my parents and sister inside their worst nightmare. Through the high-definition monitors, Terrence and I watched the absolute chaos unfold in the blood-red glow of the living room. Harrison was pacing like a caged animal, kicking the cheap staging sofa so hard the flimsy wood frame cracked. He ran his hands over his perfectly styled hair, ruining the aesthetic entirely. $2 million! Harrison screamed, his voice cracking with unfiltered panic. $2 million in cash just walked out that door. We are completely ruined. Diane was sobbing hysterically on the floor. Sydney was hyperventilating frantically, waving her cell phone in the air, trying to catch a signal. Someone hacked the house. Sydney yelled, her voice shrill and desperate. "Whoever is doing this recorded our private conversations. They know about the forged documents. They know about the retainer I took from Terrence's accounts. We are going to federal prison. Harrison stopped pacing and glared at the ceiling speakers. I reached across the control deck, deliberately dropping the cellular signal jammer. Sydney's phone suddenly pinged with incoming notifications. "We have a signal." Sydney gasped. Harrison snatched his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he dialed. I tapped into the audio receiver to listen. He was dialing 911. "Yes, I need emergency police assistance immediately," Harrison barked into the receiver, trying to inject his usual arrogant authority into his shaking voice. "My property is under a sophisticated cyber attack. We are locked inside and someone is playing threatening audio recordings trying to extort us. Send a squad car right now. My address is at the end of the cul-de-sac." He ended the call, breathing heavily. "The police will handle this," Harrison declared. "We tell them it is a malicious hacker." In the hidden server room, Terrence let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "He really thinks the police are going to save him from this," Terrence whispered. "He thinks he can just lie his way out of a federal crime." I turned off the monitors and locked the workstation, securing all the digital evidence behind military-grade encryption. "He is about to find out that his lies no longer work," I replied smoothly. "It is time to make our entrance." Terrence gripped the handles of my wheelchair, his knuckles turning white. He maneuvered me, positioning the chair directly in front of the heavy steel door. We waited in the cool silence of the server room. Less than 10 minutes later, the wail of police sirens pierced the quiet morning air. The flashing blue and red lights painted frantic patterns across the tiny slivers of glass visible through the blackout blinds. Heavy fists pounded against the thick oak of my front door. "Police department," a deep voice shouted. "Open the door immediately." Harrison rushed to the entryway, pulling frantically on the brass handle. "I cannot open it," Harrison screamed back. "The smart locks are jammed. Break it down." I reached into my pocket and pressed the emergency release sequence. A loud metallic clank echoed through the foyer as the heavy deadbolts mechanically disengaged. The police officers, assuming the lock had finally given way, shoved the heavy door inward. 3 uniformed officers stepped into the red-lit living room, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "What is going on here?" the lead officer demanded, shining a heavy tactical flashlight across the room. Harrison immediately pointed toward the ceiling. "Officer, someone has hacked this entire property," Harrison stated, slipping effortlessly into his role as the wealthy victim. "They trapped us inside and played fabricated audio files to sabotage a real estate transaction." Diane rushed forward, clutching the officer's sleeve. "Please, you have to help us," she cried, her fake tears flowing freely. "We are a grieving family. Our eldest daughter is in a coma at the hospital, and we are just trying to sell her house to pay for her tragic medical expenses. This hacker is terrorizing us." Sydney nodded vigorously, playing the traumatized sister perfectly. "We are the victims here," she added. I looked at Terrence. "Do it now," I whispered. I reached forward and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner hidden on the inside of the server room door. The heavy steel barricade hissed softly, the pneumatic seals releasing. The wooden decorative panel in the kitchen slid open with a mechanical hum. The sudden noise made the police officers and my family snap their attention toward the back of the house. The officers raised their flashlights, illuminating the newly opened doorway. Terrence pushed my wheelchair forward, rolling me completely out of the dark shadows and directly into the harsh, unforgiving glare of the bright police flashlights. I sat perfectly straight, my broken leg extended, my bruised chest wrapped securely in thick white bandages, but my eyes locked onto my parents with lethal intensity. The reaction was absolute paralyzing horror. The color instantly drained from Harrison's face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. Diane stumbled backward, her shaking hand flying to her mouth to stifle a raw, guttural scream of pure, absolute terror. Sydney froze completely in place, her eyes bulging wildly out of her head as if staring at an unstoppable monster. They had scheduled my death for 8 o'clock this morning. They had eagerly signed the fatal paperwork. They had said their brief, entirely fake goodbyes. They had come here to sell my life for cold, hard cash. And yet here I was at exactly 9 in the morning, sitting right in front of them, very much alive and breathing. The silence in the room was so profound it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the atmosphere. The police officers looked confused, glancing between my terrified family and my heavily battered form resting in the wheelchair. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice cutting like a sharpened blade. "I heard you were trying to sell my house." The silence shattered as Harrison lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of aggressive authority. He ignored my statement entirely, turning to the lead police officer. "Officer," my father said, pitching his voice perfectly calm, "you need to call an ambulance immediately. My daughter was in a catastrophic car accident 3 weeks ago. She suffered severe traumatic brain damage. She is experiencing intense hallucinations and medical delirium. We have full legal and medical authority over her care because she is entirely incapacitated." Diane seized the opening. "Yes," my mother cried out, clasping her hands to her chest in a display of maternal agony. "She must have wandered away from the hospital. She is incredibly dangerous to herself. We need to get her back to the intensive care unit." Diane took 2 rapid steps across the living room and lunged toward my wheelchair, her manicured hands reaching aggressively for the handles. She intended to seize physical control of me right in front of the police. Her eyes were completely manic, blazing with the desperate need to silence me before I ruined their plan. Terrence moved faster than any of them expected. He stepped solidly between my wheelchair and my mother, raising his broad shoulders and physically blocking her path. "Do not take another step toward her," Terrence warned, his deep voice echoing off the stripped walls. "You are not touching her. You are not taking her anywhere." Harrison flared up, pointing an accusing finger at Terrence. "Officer, arrest this man," Harrison barked. "That is my son-in-law, and he has clearly kidnapped a medically vulnerable woman from her hospital bed. Remove him from my property right now." The lead officer rested his hand firmly on his utility belt, stepping directly between Terrence and Harrison. "Everyone needs to calm down and step back immediately," the officer commanded. "Sir, you claim this woman is legally incapacitated. Do you have documentation to prove you have authority over this property and her medical decisions?" Harrison eagerly pulled his phone from his pocket. "Yes, absolutely. I have a notarized power of attorney filed just last week. It gives my wife and me complete executive control over Naomi and all her financial assets. We are executing a legal sale of this house to pay for her ongoing medical treatments." He shoved the phone toward the officer, displaying the digital copy of the forged document. I did not panic. I simply reached into the thick leather portfolio resting on my lap. "Officer," I said, keeping my voice steady and rational, "my father is currently presenting you with a fraudulently obtained document. The signature on that power of attorney was forged while I was in a medically induced coma. I am the sole owner of this property, and I am completely lucid." I pulled a stack of papers from the portfolio and extended my hand. The officer approached cautiously, taking the documents. "This is a certified, legally binding, revocable living trust," I explained clearly, making sure Harrison and Diane heard every single word. "It was established and fully funded 3 years ago. I am the sole trustee. My corporate attorney is the designated successor, not my parents. That trust holds the deed to this house, all of my corporate banking accounts, and my personal assets. A power of attorney cannot override a funded living trust under state law. The document my father just showed you is entirely legally worthless." Harrison went completely rigid. He stared at the papers in the officer's hands, his confident facade shattering into a million pieces. He had never anticipated that I would have complex estate planning in place. I was not finished. I handed the officer a second stack of papers. "Here is the time-stamped digital forensic report detailing the exact moment the forged power of attorney was submitted." I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "It includes the IP address of the corrupt notary who processed it, and the wire transfer receipt showing my sister Sydney using stolen corporate funds from her husband's architecture firm to pay the fraudulent lawyer. Sydney gasped, loudly shrinking back against the staging sofa. Terence stood tall behind my wheelchair, glaring at his wife with absolute disgust. The lead officer scrutinized the heavy embossed seal on my living trust, then looked at the date on Harrison's digital document. The officer frowned, his demeanor shifting entirely as he turned back to face my parents. "Sir," the officer said to Harrison, his voice dropping to a stern register, "this living trust predates your power of attorney by 3 years. Furthermore, the property deed is clearly titled under the trust, not her individual name. You have zero legal authority to authorize the sale of this house today." "That is impossible," Harrison sputtered. "She is mentally incompetent. She belongs in a psychiatric ward. This is my family, and I am taking control of this situation right now." "You are trespassing," I stated flatly. "Officer, I want these 3 individuals removed from my property immediately. They do not have my permission to be here. They have systematically looted my home, sold my personal belongings, and attempted to finalize a fraudulent real estate transaction. If they do not leave right now, I want them arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted real estate fraud." The lead officer nodded, gesturing for his 2 partners to step forward. "You heard the homeowner," the officer instructed Harrison. "You and your family need to vacate the premises immediately. If you have a dispute regarding her medical competence, you can take it up in civil court. But right now you are trespassing. Move toward the door." Diane began to sob, looking at me, pleading for mercy. "You signed a paper to stop my heart," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. "You do not get to play the victim." Sydney grabbed her purse and darted toward the front door. Harrison struggled against the police. "I will destroy you," he spat. The real war was about to begin. The real war was about to begin. I watched the police cruisers pull away from the curb through the living room window. The flashing lights disappeared down the street, leaving my house in absolute silence. Terence locked the heavy front door, throwing the deadbolt with a resounding click. We had won the battle today, but Harrison was a cornered animal. A man facing imminent bankruptcy and federal fraud charges would not simply walk away and accept defeat. I turned my wheelchair back toward the hidden server room. We needed to prepare for the inevitable legal retaliation. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Bradley, my primary corporate attorney. Bradley was a bulldog in the courtroom, someone who understood the ruthless nature of financial warfare. When he answered, I quickly briefed him on the hospital escape, the forged documents, and the spectacular failure of the open house. Bradley listened without interruption. When I finished, his tone was gravely serious. "Naomi, they are going to escalate this immediately," Bradley warned. "They failed to sell the property, and they failed to terminate your life support. Their only remaining option is to strip you of your legal autonomy entirely. They will file for a conservatorship." I gripped the armrest of my wheelchair. Can they actually do that? I have a funded living trust. They can try to invalidate the trust if they convince a judge you lacked mental capacity when you created it, or if they prove you are currently a danger to yourself, Bradley explained. They will weaponize your car accident. They will claim the traumatic brain injury has rendered you paranoid and incompetent. Be ready for a process server. I ended the call, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Terence looked at me, his expression tight with concern. "What did Bradley say?" Terence asked. I took a slow breath. "They are coming for my mind," I replied. "They are going to try to lock me in a legal cage." The prediction became reality faster than either of us anticipated. The very next morning, a loud pounding on the front door shattered the quiet of the house. Terence walked to the foyer and checked the security monitor. A man in a plain gray suit stood on the porch holding a thick manila envelope. I wheeled myself out of the server room, my instincts already screaming a warning. Terence opened the door just a crack. "Are you Naomi?" the man asked, trying to peer past Terence. I rolled forward into his line of sight. "I am Naomi," I answered firmly. The man shoved the envelope through the narrow gap in the door and let it drop onto the floor. "You have been served," he announced flatly, before turning and walking rapidly back to his car. Terrence picked up the heavy envelope and brought it to the kitchen island. I tore it open, pulling out a massive stack of legal filings stamped with the seal of the county probate court. The bold black letters at the top of the first page confirmed my absolute worst fears. It was an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary conservatorship. Harrison and Diane were listed as the proposed co-conservators. They had bypassed standard legal procedures by filing an emergency petition, claiming I was in immediate life-threatening danger. I flipped through the pages reading the outrageous allegations they had submitted to a judge under the penalty of perjury. My mother had submitted a sworn affidavit stating I had absconded from an intensive care unit against medical advice while suffering from severe brain damage. She painted a picture of a delusional daughter who needed immediate institutionalization for her own safety. But the most damning piece of evidence was buried near the back of the packet. I pulled out a formal medical evaluation printed on expensive clinic letterhead. The signature at the bottom belonged to a corrupt private doctor with a highly questionable reputation in the city. Terrence leaned over my shoulder, reading the diagnostic summary aloud. Patient exhibits profound paranoid delusions, severe cognitive impairment, secondary to traumatic brain injury, and aggressive tendencies. Patient is entirely incapable of managing personal or financial affairs and poses a significant risk of self-harm. Terrence slammed his hand against the kitchen island. "This is completely fabricated. You never even met this doctor. How can he submit a psychological evaluation without ever examining you in person?" "He was bribed," I stated coldly, staring at the fraudulent signature. "Harrison used the last of his stolen cash to buy a corrupt doctor. They presented my hospital escape as proof of erratic, dangerous behavior." The judge saw a signed affidavit from a licensed psychiatrist claiming I was a threat to myself, and granted the emergency motion without ever giving me a chance to defend myself in court. This document gives Harrison and Diane complete, unchecked authority over every aspect of my life. It grants them the power to force me into a psychiatric facility against my will. It gives them the right to override my living trust by claiming I was mentally unfit when I designated my assets. I reached for my laptop, opening a secure browser window to access my primary public banking portals. I needed to move any remaining liquid cash into my encrypted offshore accounts before the conservatorship order permeated the financial system. I typed my credentials and hit enter. A red error message flashed across the screen. "Account frozen by court order." I tried my checking account, my investment portfolios, and my public credit lines. Every single one returned the same message. The emergency ex parte order had been processed by the financial institutions. My parents had successfully severed my access to the outside world. Harrison and Diane had essentially locked me inside a financial and legal prison. They thought they had finally won. They thought they had neutralized the threat. But they had completely forgotten about the hidden server room, and they severely underestimated the ghost they had created. We sat in the cold glow, the reality of the frozen account settling over us. The conservatorship was a brutal blow, but it was only the first wave of their coordinated assault. Harrison and Diane targeted my financial autonomy, but Sydney decided to eliminate my remaining ally. If they could not force me into submission, they would strip away the one person standing between me and their absolute control. Terrence, my trusted brother-in-law, was their next calculated target. It started 48 hours after the open house disaster. Terrence was at his architectural firm trying to mitigate the damage Sydney had done to his corporate ledger. At exactly noon, two aggressive uniformed police officers walked into his design studio. They were not there to ask questions. They handed Terrence a temporary domestic violence restraining order. Sydney had marched into a family court that morning, produced fake bruised photographs, and sworn under oath that Terrence had physically assaulted her and threatened her life after she uncovered his supposed affair with me. The restraining order was ruthless and immediate. It barred Terrence from coming within 500 feet of his home, his wife, and his primary business accounts, which Sydney linked to their marital trust. The police escorted Terrence out of his own office building in front of his staff and clients. He was not allowed to pack a bag or retrieve his laptop. They treated him like a dangerous criminal, publicly humiliating a man who had never raised his voice, let alone his hand to anyone. Sydney did not stop at simply evicting him. Using the temporary legal injunction, she petitioned the bank to freeze Terrence's remaining commercial assets, claiming he was attempting to hide marital funds to fund an illicit lifestyle. The bank manager complied instantly. Within 6 hours, Terrence went from being a respected, successful architect to a man standing on the sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on his back and a cell phone that was rapidly running out of battery. He showed up at my front door just as the sun was setting. He looked completely shattered. The vibrant, fiercely loyal man who had wheeled me out of the intensive care unit now stood on my porch, shivering in the evening chill. I unlocked the door, and he stepped inside, leaning heavily against the foyer wall. "She took everything, Naomi," he whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of profound grief and utter disbelief. "She locked me out. She froze the firm. She told the police I hit her. I guided him back to the hidden server room. It was the only place in the house where we were completely insulated from the outside world. I unfolded a small camping cot in the corner, placing a spare blanket and a pillow on it. Terrence sat on the edge of the cot, burying his face in his hands. He had sacrificed his entire life to protect me from my toxic parents, and Sydney had rewarded his loyalty by systematically dismantling his reputation and his livelihood. We were both ghosts now, trapped in a digital fortress, while our family danced on our graves. But Sydney was not finished. Having neutralized Terrence legally, she launched a massive public relations offensive. The next morning, my security feeds pinged with hundreds of sudden social media notifications. Sydney had posted a tearful, highly edited video on her public profiles. She sat on the expensive beige staging sofa wearing minimal makeup and looking deliberately exhausted. She stared directly into the camera, squeezing out perfectly timed tears as she spun a narrative of pure, unadulterated fiction. "Please, if anyone is watching this, we need help," Sydney pleaded in the video. "My sister Naomi suffered a catastrophic brain injury in a terrible car crash. She is severely mentally ill, completely paranoid, and deeply confused. My husband Terrence has been taking advantage of her broken mental state. He has isolated her in her house. He is manipulating her finances. We are terrified he is holding her hostage against her will, and he recently became violent with me when I tried to intervene. We just want to get my sister the psychiatric help she desperately needs." The video went viral within hours. Sydney's performance was Oscar-worthy. She painted me as a tragic, brain-damaged victim and Terrence as a violent, opportunistic predator. The comments section flooded with sympathy for my family and absolute vitriol for Terrence. Local news blogs picked up the story, sharing the clip across multiple platforms. The public pressure mounted with terrifying speed. People who had never met us were suddenly deeply invested in our destruction. By the afternoon, a small crowd of amateur internet sleuths and aggressive reporters had gathered at the end of my cul-de-sac. They pointed cameras at my house, trying to catch a glimpse of the supposedly hostage woman and her violent captor. They shouted questions over the property line, demanding that Terrence come out and face justice. The Neighborhood Watch Committee flooded my inbox with angry emails demanding we explain the police presence and the media circus ruining their quiet street. We sat in the server room watching the mob grow on the security monitors. The sheer scale of their manipulation was breathtaking. Harrison and Diane had weaponized the legal system to freeze my assets, and Sydney had weaponized the court of public opinion to destroy Terrence's life. They had successfully boxed us into a corner, cutting off our resources, our mobility, and our reputations. The walls were closing in, and the public was eagerly cheering for our downfall. Terrence looked at the monitor, watching the reporters camped on the lawn. He clenched his jaw, the despair from the previous night hardening into cold, absolute resolve. "Let them talk, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Let them build their fake narrative. It will just make the fall that much harder when we finally cut their legs out from under them." I nodded, turning back to my encrypted workstation. We were physically trapped inside the walls of my home, but we were far from helpless in this fight. We were physically trapped inside the walls of my home, but we were far from helpless in this fight. I reached for my encrypted phone and dialed Bradley. The line connected instantly. My high-powered corporate lawyer was already drafting a brutal counter-injunction to shatter the conservatorship. I told him to stop. Bradley fell completely silent on the other end of the line. I explained my strategy with cold precision. I told him to stall the hearings. I wanted him to file endless procedural motions, request extensions, and bury the court in tedious paperwork. I explicitly ordered him not to present the medical evidence that would clear my name just yet. We needed to drag the conservatorship proceedings out for at least another month. Bradley protested immediately, warning me that delaying the hearing meant my public assets would remain frozen and my parents would retain their temporary legal authority over my life. I told him that was exactly what I wanted them to believe. If we fought back right now, Harrison and Diane would simply pivot to a new scam. They were desperate animals backed into a financial corner. If we hit them with our full arsenal today, they would scramble and hide their remaining assets. We needed them to feel safe. We needed them to feel victorious and completely untouchable. I told Bradley that I was going to play the perfect tragic victim. Terrence and I instituted a total media blackout. We deactivated our public social media profiles. We ignored the reporters shouting from the edge of my lawn. We did not release a single statement defending ourselves against Sydney's vicious smear campaign. We let the public believe every horrible lie my sister had spun. The internet trolls rejoiced, crowning Sydney as a heroic savior, while branding Terrence and me as unstable monsters. The silence from our end was deafening, and it worked flawlessly. Within a week, the news vans outside my house lost interest and drove away. The neighborhood watch stopped sending angry emails. The world moved on, convinced that the tragic saga of the brain-damaged accountant and her violent brother-in-law had reached its pathetic conclusion. Inside the hidden server room, we monitored the fallout. Harrison and Diane interpreted our absolute silence as total crushing defeat. In their greedy minds, they had successfully starved me of financial resources and legally trapped me in my own home. They believed Terrence was broken and penniless, sleeping on the streets while I rotted away under their conservatorship. Their arrogance swelled to massive proportions. Without the immediate threat of my retaliation, Harrison shifted his focus back to his collapsing construction empire. His creditors were still breathing down his neck, demanding the millions he had squandered. The failed open house had cost him his quick cash infusion, but his inflated ego convinced him he could still salvage his company. Harrison and Diane desperately needed a massive new source of capital, and they eagerly decided to mine the supposed tragedy of their sick daughter to successfully get it. They announced a massive opulent black tie gala. Through my network surveillance, I intercepted the digital invitations Diane was sending to every wealthy investor, socialite, and corporate executive in the city. The event was billed as an exclusive investment summit for Harrison's firm, but the marketing materials were dripping with emotional manipulation. Diane had plastered my old college graduation photo on the digital brochures accompanying it with a heart-wrenching story about my devastating car accident. They were using my fabricated mental decline to garner sympathy from the exact investors who had previously rejected Harrison's business proposals. They framed the gala as a triumphant family comeback, promising that any investments in Harrison's company would also help fund a new long-term care facility for victims of severe traumatic brain injury. It was a thoroughly sickening, yet undeniably brilliant piece of highly calculated psychological manipulation. They were selling my fake tragedy to save their real bankruptcy. Terrence watched the gala preparations unfold on the monitors with a look of pure disgust. Diane was spending thousands of dollars on floral arrangements and premium catering, charging it all to a high-interest credit line she secured using the temporary conservatorship as collateral. Sydney was bragging to her friends about the custom designer gown she bought for the event, completely ignoring the fact that she had destroyed her husband's life just days prior. They were celebrating their victory on the deck of a sinking ship. They truly believed they had completely and entirely outsmarted everyone. Harrison was aggressively courting a group of elite venture capitalists, promising them massive returns if they bailed out his construction firm during the gala. He sent emails assuring these investors that his daughter was safely institutionalized and his family assets were completely secure. He was lying through his teeth to secure a financial lifeline. I zoomed in on the guest list for the upcoming gala. It was a highly detailed list of the city's financial elite. Harrison wanted a public stage to secure his funding, and I was more than happy to let him build it. The larger the audience, the more devastating his eventual fall would be. I turned to Terrence and pointed at the flashing names on the screen. "They think I am a helpless victim trapped in this house," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the server room. "They think they have locked me out of my own bank accounts. But they forgot that my public accounts are just the tip of the iceberg." I pulled up a hidden encrypted financial gateway that connected directly to my offshore assets. The conservatorship could not touch this money because it did not legally exist under my name. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to buy the board. I began typing the highly complex digital command sequences that would immediately launch the single most aggressive and absolutely ruthless financial maneuver of my entire professional corporate career. I began typing the complex digital command sequences that would launch the single most aggressive financial maneuver of my professional career. The dual monitors flared with cascading code as I bypassed my frozen domestic accounts and tunneled directly into my secured offshore architecture. Harrison and Diane thought they had severed my financial lifeline by weaponizing the probate court. They fundamentally misunderstood how a forensic accountant structures her ultimate safety net. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard accessing a private wealth management node based in the Cayman Islands. This node was completely insulated from United States jurisdiction, meaning the temporary conservatorship my parents fraudulently obtained held zero legal authority here. I turned to Terrence, who watched the encrypted banking gateways opening on the screens. "We need an untraceable corporate entity to execute this buyout." I explained, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "If my name appears on any of these transfers, Harrison's lawyers will immediately petition the court to block the transactions. I am forming an anonymous, limited liability company based in Wyoming. It possesses strict privacy laws, shielding the identity of the beneficial owner behind a registered agent. To the outside world, this company will look like a faceless private equity firm acquiring distressed commercial debt." I initiated the automated incorporation protocols. Within 15 minutes, I had legally established Obsidian Asset Management, LLC. I immediately wired $8 million of clean untraceable capital from my offshore trust directly into Obsidian's newly minted corporate operating account. The war chest was fully funded and ready for deployment. Terrence pulled up his encrypted tablet, syncing it with my workstation. I mapped out the primary commercial lenders holding the paper on Harrison's failing construction empire. Terrence stated, transferring a spreadsheet onto my monitor. "Harrison has 3 major points of catastrophic failure. First, he defaulted on the mezzanine loan for his latest commercial project. Second, his leasing company is preparing to repossess his entire fleet of heavy machinery due to unpaid invoices. Third, he leveraged his personal estate for a short-term bridge loan that matured last Tuesday. He is bleeding out completely." I nodded, scanning the massive debt profiles. Institutional lenders absolutely despise non-performing commercial loans. They view them as toxic assets weighing down their quarterly balance sheets. When a developer stops making payments, banks are desperately willing to sell that bad debt for pennies on the dollar just to clear their books. Obsidian Asset Management, LLC, was about to become their absolute favorite financial savior. I drafted a series of aggressive acquisition proposals utilizing the official corporate letterhead of my newly formed Wyoming LLC. I sent the heavily encrypted offers directly to the executive directors of Harrison's primary lending institutions. The proposition was simple and highly lucrative. Obsidian Asset Management offered to purchase Harrison's toxic debt portfolios entirely in cash, assuming all legal risks and removing non-performing loans from their immediate liabilities. Because I offered immediate liquidity to these frustrated lenders, They asked zero questions about Obsidian's beneficial ownership. Cash is the only king that truly matters. While we waited for the commercial lenders to process the buyout contracts, I shifted my crosshairs to my arrogant sister. Sydney had gleefully destroyed Terrence's architectural firm and falsely accused him of domestic violence. It was time to systematically dismantle her financial reality. I accessed the secondary credit monitoring databases, pulling the deeply buried financial records for Sydney's personal accounts. The data was a spectacular disaster of reckless vanity. Sydney possessed 7 premium credit cards, all completely maxed out on luxury designer clothing, expensive vacations, and cosmetic procedures. She had missed her minimum payments for 6 consecutive months. The original credit card issuers had already written off her massive balances as total losses and sold her outstanding debt to a predatory collection agency. I tracked down the specific collection agency holding Sydney's paper. Using Obsidian Asset Management, I initiated a bulk portfolio purchase. It cost me barely 10 cents on the dollar to acquire the exclusive rights to Sydney's crippling consumer debt. The transaction cleared within seconds. My sister was no longer in debt to a faceless bank. She now owed every single dime of her lavish lifestyle directly to me. By late afternoon, the commercial banks holding Harrison's corporate loans responded. The executives were absolutely thrilled to unload his failing construction debt. I authorized the electronic wire transfers, releasing the funds from Obsidian's accounts. Digital signatures were exchanged through secured legal portals. The final promissory notes, the equipment liens and the primary mortgage on Harrison's estate were officially transferred to Obsidian Asset Management. I leaned back in my wheelchair as the final confirmation receipts printed from the secure laser printer in the room. Terrence picked up the warm sheets of paper, reading over the legal transfer documents. He looked at me, profound awe and terrifying realization washing his face. "You bought it all," Terrence whispered, his voice echoing in the quiet server room. "Every loan, every mortgage, every single credit card." I looked at the monitors, which now displayed the complete financial ownership of my toxic family. Harrison and Diane think they are attending a glamorous gala tomorrow night to secure an angel investor, I said, a cold smile curving my lips. They are going to stand on a public stage and beg the incredibly wealthy elite to save their crumbling empire. They have absolutely no idea that their empire has already been completely sold. I own the mortgage on their house. I own the equipment their company needs to operate. I own the bridge loan keeping them out of bankruptcy court. I own every single pair of expensive designer shoes Sydney bought. Terrence set the papers down on the desk. "So what happens when they breach the covenants on these loans?" I linked my fingers together, resting them on my lap. "As the primary debt holder, I have the absolute legal right to demand immediate accelerated repayment in full. We own their entire existence. Now we let them walk into it." 48 hours later, the grand ballroom of the Oakmont Country Club was bathed in the glow of massive crystal chandeliers. This was the crown jewel of my parents' fabricated social empire. Harrison and Diane spared no expense, charging the catering string quartet and premium open bar to a credit line secured using the fraudulent conservatorship. I sat in the darkened back seat of a transport van parked beyond the valet stand, monitoring the gala through an audio feed. Terrence sat beside me, dressed in a sharp midnight blue suit, his posture rigid with focused anticipation. We listened to the clinking of champagne flutes and the arrogant hum of the city's financial elite. Inside, Harrison worked the floor with the charm of a con artist. He wore a custom black tuxedo that masked his financial desperation. Diane floated beside him in an emerald gown, wearing a diamond necklace purchased just 2 days prior. Sydney held court near the ice sculpture, wearing a dress costing more than her husband's stolen retainer. Through the audio feed, I heard Sydney playing the traumatized sister to perfection. She spoke in hushed tones to wealthy socialites, weaving a fabricated tale about how her unstable husband tried to drain her finances, forcing her to kick him out to protect her family. The sheer audacity of her lies made Terrence clench his fists in the dark van, but he remained perfectly silent. The time for anger had passed. Tonight was strictly about execution. At 8 o'clock, the string quartet faded. The sharp sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute echoed through the ballroom. The incredibly wealthy guests lowered their voices, turning their attention toward the grand podium erected at the front of the hall. Harrison stepped up to the microphone, adjusting his silk tie with a look of profound, manufactured humility. Diane stood dutifully at his side, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder and looking out at the crowd with wide, glistening eyes. "Thank you," Harrison began, his deep voice resonating through the sound system. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. Looking out at this room, I see friends, trusted colleagues, and the unbreakable spirit of our community. This past year tested our family and our corporate legacy in ways I never could have imagined. As many of you here know, the construction market faced unprecedented volatility. We took some massive hits. We faced aggressive headwinds that threatened to dismantle the empire my father built and the company I dedicated my life to expanding." Harrison paused, letting a heavy dramatic silence wash over the room. He looked down at the podium, playing the heavily burdened titan of industry. But financial struggles pale in comparison to the personal tragedies that strike. Without warning, Harrison continued, his voice dropping an octave to convey an illusion of grief. 3 weeks ago, our eldest daughter Naomi was involved in a catastrophic car accident. She suffered severe, irreversible brain trauma. The brilliant, vibrant young woman we raised was fundamentally altered in an instant. She has been struggling with intense paranoia, severe cognitive decline, and dangerous behavioral outbursts. It broke our hearts to watch her slip away from us, lost in the dark maze of a broken mind. In the van, I felt my heart steady into a slow, icy rhythm. I listened to my father publicly declare me insane to a room full of people I had done business with. Diane leaned into the microphone, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical precision. "We tried everything to care for her at home," Diane whimpered to the crowd. "But the medical professionals made it clear that she needs specialized round-the-clock psychiatric intervention. It is the hardest decision a mother could make, but we are legally committing Naomi to a permanent long-term care facility next week. It is for her own good. We have to ensure she is safe from herself and those who might take advantage of her fractured mental state." A collective murmur of deep sympathy rolled through the ballroom. The investors and socialites shook their heads completely, buying into the tragic narrative. Harrison stepped back to the microphone, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye, before straightening his posture to project renewed strength. "But we are survivors," Harrison declared, his voice rising with triumphant energy. "And a family standing together cannot be broken by tragedy. I am incredibly proud to announce tonight that our corporate perseverance has been rewarded. Just 48 hours ago, a silent angel investor stepped out of the shadows. This private equity firm recognized the intrinsic, undeniable value of our construction empire. They executed a massive capital maneuver, purchasing every single piece of our outstanding corporate debt. They cleared our ledgers. They neutralized our aggressive creditors. This silent partner secured our future, proving our legacy is fundamentally bulletproof." The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic, thunderous applause. The wealthy attendees cheered, raising their glasses to salute Harrison's miraculous financial resurrection. Sydney cheered the loudest from the front row, holding her champagne high in the air, celebrating the millions she believed they had just secured. Harrison smiled broadly, raising his glass toward the dazzling chandeliers. To the future, Harrison toasted, his voice echoing with absolute blind arrogance. "To the strength of our family, the loyalty of our friends, and the silent angel investor who recognized that we are too big to fail." The applause swelled to a deafening roar. They stood at the absolute pinnacle of their false victory, completely intoxicated by their own brilliant deception. They thought they had successfully buried me in a psychiatric ward. They thought they manipulated the financial markets to save their sinking ship. They thought they were completely untouchable. I unbuckled my seatbelt in the dark transport van and looked at Terrence. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with a fierce, undeniable readiness. I reached for the door handle. It was time to show them exactly what a ghost looks like when it comes to collect. I pushed the heavy sliding door of the transport van open and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The transition from the dark interior of the vehicle to the brightly lit country club parking lot felt like crossing a threshold between two entirely different realities. I did not reach for the wheelchair that had been my prop and my prison for the past month. Instead, I planted my leather heels firmly onto the pavement. My fractured ribs still ached with a dull throbbing, and my left leg felt stiff, but the physical pain was completely overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of the moment. I stood perfectly upright, smoothing the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray suit. The sharp structured lines of the blazer and the immaculate press of the trousers projected absolute, uncompromising authority. I looked nothing like the broken brain damaged victim my parents had just described to their wealthy audience. I looked like a corporate executioner. Terrence stepped out of the van and took his place on my right side. His midnight blue suit was immaculate, his posture radiating a quiet, dangerous confidence. The gentle architect Sydney thought she could easily manipulate was gone, replaced by a man fully prepared to burn her fraudulent world to the ground. On my left side stood Bradley, my corporate attorney. He clutched a thick leather briefcase containing the federal injunctions and the finalized Shell Company financial records. Bradley adjusted his tie, giving me a brief, sharp nod. We walked together toward the grand entrance of the Oakmont Country Club, our footsteps echoing in perfect unison across the manicured cobblestone pathway. The valet attendants stared as we bypassed their podium and marched directly through the massive glass front doors. The lobby of the club was dripping in excessive wealth, featuring marble floors and towering floral arrangements Diane had undoubtedly selected to project their fake prosperity. The general manager of the club, a man in a stiff tuxedo, immediately stepped into our path, holding up a hand to stop our advance. He recognized me from the malicious social media smear campaign Sydney had orchestrated. "Mom, you cannot be here," the manager stated, his voice laced with patronizing concern. "This is an exclusive event. I have been instructed that you are medically unstable. I need to ask you to leave before I am forced to call security to escort you back to your facility." I did not slow my pace. Bradley effortlessly slid between me and the manager, smoothly pulling a heavily embossed legal document from his breast pocket. He pressed the paper directly into the manager's chest. "You are currently holding a federal judicial injunction issued by the United States District Court," Bradley informed the manager, his voice carrying the lethal calm of a seasoned litigator. "It mandates my client possesses the absolute legal right to enter this venue. If your security team attempts to physically impede her progress, you will be violating a federal order, and I will personally sue this club into permanent bankruptcy." The manager looked down at the federal seal, his face draining of all color. He stepped completely out of our way, signaling his lobby staff to stand down. We moved past him, heading straight for the double mahogany doors of the grand ballroom. The sound of thunderous applause was just fading inside the hall following Harrison's arrogant toast. I placed my hands flat against the polished wood of the heavy ballroom doors. I took one final deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. Then I shoved both doors inward with every ounce of physical strength I possessed. The heavy mahogany doors slammed against the interior walls with a massive, booming crack that echoed over the sound system. The loud impact instantly severed the remaining applause. The room of elite investors and wealthy socialites turned simultaneously toward the entrance. A collective, audible gasp rippled across the massive banquet hall. The sheer shock of my physical appearance paralyzed the entire room. They were expecting a tragic, mentally absent ghost confined to a wheelchair. Instead, they saw a fiercely focused professional woman standing tall, flanked by a formidable legal and personal security detail. I walked slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom, my leather heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd literally parted for me. Whispers erupted from every direction as the investors recognized my face from the brochures, unable to reconcile the tragic story they had been fed with the powerful reality marching toward the stage. On the grand podium, the illusion of my parents' perfect victory shattered. Diane stared at me, her eyes bulging in sheer horror. Her fingers went entirely limp. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her hand, crashing onto the stage floor and shattering into sparkling fragments around her expensive heels. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. She simply stood there, trembling violently in her emerald gown. Sydney sat in the front row, completely frozen in her chair. The smug, victorious smile she had worn just seconds prior melted into a mask of pure terror. She looked at me, and then her eyes shifted to Terrence. Seeing the cold, unforgiving rage radiating from her husband, she physically shrank back into her seat. Harrison grabbed the microphone, his face flushing a furious red. "Security," Harrison roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "Get security in here immediately. My daughter is having a severe psychiatric episode. She is completely delusional and highly unstable. Remove her right now." Two security guards rushed forward. Bradley stepped up, raising the federal injunction high. "Stand down, immediately," Bradley commanded, projecting across the silent ballroom. "I hold a certified federal injunction and a psychiatric clearance from the Federal Medical Board. My client is fully legally competent. If any employee touches her, you will be arrested for felony assault." The club manager rushed in, waving frantically at the guards to back away. The guards retreated into the shadows. I stood still. As the heavy mahogany doors closed behind us, sealing the ballroom entirely. The security guards backed away, completely neutralized by the federal injunction Bradley held high in the air. The club manager retreated into the shadows, leaving my parents and my sister completely exposed on the grand stage. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my leather heels against the polished hardwood floor as I resumed my march toward the podium. Harrison remained frozen behind the microphone, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edges of the wooden stand. Diane was hyperventilating beside him, staring at me as if a corpse had crawled out of a grave to drag her to hell. Sydney remained glued to her front row seat, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as Terrence stepped forward and stood directly beside her, blocking her only avenue of escape. An event coordinator in a black headset stood near the base of the stage, holding a wireless microphone intended for the audience question and answer session. She was trembling, entirely unsure of how to handle the sudden derailment of the gala. I walked straight up to her, extending my right hand. She surrendered the microphone without a single word of protest. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps onto the stage. Harrison tried to step in front of me, his mouth opening to issue another desperate command, but Bradley materialized at my side. My attorney did not need to speak. His imposing presence and the legal documents clutched in his hand forced my father to step aside. I took my place at the center of the stage, looking out over the sea of wealthy investors, venture capitalists, and elite socialites. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive ballroom speakers. "I apologize for interrupting the festivities. My father was just telling you a deeply moving story about our family. He painted a tragic picture of a daughter lost to severe brain damage, a mind shattered beyond repair, and a family valiantly struggling to save their legacy." I paused, letting my sharp gaze sweep across the front rows. The investors were leaning forward, captivated and horrified. "As you can clearly see," I continued, my tone dropping to a cold clinical register, "I am not suffering from cognitive decline. I am not delusional. I am a senior forensic accountant, and I am entirely legally competent. My parents lied to you tonight. They lied to the probate court. They lied to the hospital ethics board when they eagerly signed the paperwork to terminate my life support just a few weeks ago." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Several high-profile investors exchanged alarmed glances, realizing they had been sitting in a room with individuals capable of attempted murder. Harrison reached for the podium microphone, his face slick with panic sweat. "Do not listen to her," Harrison shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is exactly the paranoia we warned you about. She is experiencing a severe psychiatric episode." I did not even look at him. I simply raised my hand, and Bradley opened his thick leather briefcase. He pulled out a stack of crisp, legally binding documents, handing them to me. I held the heavy stack of papers up for the entire room to see. My father also told you a very inspiring story about a silent angel investor I announced, projecting my voice over his pathetic protests. He told you that a private equity firm miraculously stepped out of the shadows 48 hours ago to purchase his failing corporate debt. He claimed this investor recognized the undeniable value of his construction empire and saved this family from absolute bankruptcy. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with my father. His breathing became shallow and erratic. "Allow me to introduce myself," I said, a razor-sharp smile curving my lips. "I am the sole beneficial owner of Obsidian Asset Management, LLC. I am the silent angel investor. I own every single piece of your toxic corporate debt, Harrison. I own your equipment liens. I own the mezzanine loan you defaulted on, and I own the bridge loan keeping your personal estate out of foreclosure." Harrison stumbled backward, physically reeling as the truth slammed into him. Diane let out a strangled, breathless whimper, covering her face with her hands. The investors in the audience began whispering frantically, the reality of the massive financial deception dawning on them. They had almost handed their millions over to a man who was entirely owned by his own daughter. "But I am not here to save your company," I continued, my voice ringing with absolute, unapologetic authority. "I am a forensic accountant, and when I purchased your debt portfolios, I conducted a comprehensive audit of your financial ledgers. I did not just find a struggling business. I found systematic, deliberate financial fraud." I held up the first legal document, snapping the crisp paper with my fingers. "You breached 5 separate financial covenants on your primary commercial loan," I stated, listing the violations with lethal precision. "You commingled corporate funds with personal accounts to pay for my mother's luxury shopping sprees. You falsified equipment depreciation logs to artificially inflate your balance sheets. You created phantom vendor invoices to hide massive cash withdrawals. You committed blatant wire fraud to secure your latest round of bridge financing." Harrison grabbed his chest, his breathing deteriorating into rapid, shallow gasps. He looked wildly at the investors in the front row, holding out his hands in a pathetic gesture of defense. "It is a lie," Harrison wheezed. "She is fabricating the data. I run a legitimate enterprise." "No, you run a criminal slush fund," I corrected him instantly. "I am accelerating the debt right now. We are liquidating your company, your personal assets, and your elite country club membership tonight completely. You are utterly ruined, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop me." Harrison's knees buckled. The weight of his catastrophic financial reality crashed down on him. He collapsed onto the polished wooden stage, his custom tuxedo crumpling around him as he gasped for air. He gripped the podium, his knuckles stark white, unable to articulate a single coherent defense against my accusations. The murmurs in the grand ballroom escalated into a chaotic frenzy of panicked whispers. High-profile investors who had been eager to hand over their wealth physically stepped backward, distancing themselves from the toxic blast radius of my family. Diane watched her husband fall, her eyes darting frantically across the sea of horrified faces. Driven by absolute desperation to maintain her crumbling social empire, my mother lunged for the microphone stand. She shoved Harrison aside, her emerald gown twisting violently around her ankles. She gripped the microphone with both hands, her voice pitching into a shrill, hysterical shriek that pierced the ballroom. "Do not listen to a single word she says," Diane screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "She has no legal authority to do any of this. She is a severely mentally ill woman. My husband and I hold a court-ordered conservatorship over her entire estate. She is legally incompetent. Her brain is damaged. Any financial move she claims to have made is completely invalid under the law. Security, you have to arrest her immediately. She belongs in a locked psychiatric ward." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took a half step back, allowing my attorney to take the floor. Bradley stepped up to the microphone, radiating the cold energy of a predator cornering his prey. He adjusted his glasses, looking at the wealthy crowd with absolute disdain. "My name is Bradley," he announced, his deep voice carrying effortless authority. "I am the senior corporate counsel representing Obsidian Asset Management and the personal legal representative for my client. Regarding the emergency ex parte conservatorship, Mrs. Diane just mentioned I have a very important update for everyone in this room." Bradley opened his briefcase and extracted a thick stack of documents stamped with heavy federal seals. He held them high into the glare of the chandeliers. This morning, Bradley continued, his tone clinical and unyielding. "My client underwent a comprehensive, independent psychological evaluation conducted directly by the Federal Medical Board. The results were unanimous and indisputable. She possesses zero cognitive impairment. She has absolutely no brain damage. She is operating at the highest level of mental acuity. As of 2 hours ago, a federal judge officially dissolved the fraudulent conservatorship your family attempted to weaponize against her." Diane shook her head frantically. "That is impossible," Diane shrieked. "We have a signed evaluation from a licensed psychiatrist. We filed it with the probate court. We have the medical proof." Bradley let out a sharp, humorless laugh, locking his eyes onto my mother. "You mean the corrupt private doctor you illegally bribed with stolen cash?" Bradley asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "The one who fabricated a psychological profile without ever conducting a physical examination of my client. I have some unfortunate news regarding his medical practice. At exactly 6 o'clock this morning, federal agents raided his private clinic. The FBI arrested him on multiple felony charges, including severe medical fraud, perjury, and federal conspiracy. He is sitting in a federal holding cell, and he has already agreed to provide a full confession regarding your bribery in exchange for a reduced sentence." Diane let out a choked, breathless gasp. The microphone slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the wooden stage before rolling to a stop near Harrison's knee. The last pillar of their elaborate deception had just been annihilated. While the ballroom stared in stunned silence at the two criminals collapsing on the stage, the focus abruptly shifted. Terrence, who had been standing silently at my side like an immovable fortress, finally made his move. He marched down the carpeted steps of the stage, his midnight blue suit catching the light. He headed straight for the front row, where his wife remained frozen in her seat. Sydney looked up at him, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. The wealthy friends she had been gossiping with were now staring at her in shock. Sydney tried to shrink back into the plush fabric of her chair, but there was nowhere left to hide. Terrence stopped directly in front of her. He looked down at the woman who had systematically attempted to destroy his life and his reputation. The profound disgust in his eyes was absolute. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder. He dropped it directly onto Sydney's lap. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet space. "What is this?" Sydney whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Those are your divorce papers," Terrence stated, his voice echoing with cold, unforgiving finality. "Attached to them is a civil lawsuit filed in federal court for the financial embezzlement of $50,000 from my corporate business accounts. I have the bank routing numbers, the fake vendor invoices you created, and the digital footprints linking the stolen funds directly to the corrupt attorney you hired to forge your sister's power of attorney." "Terrence, please." Sydney begged, tears streaming down her face. "We can fix this." "You are a criminal," Terrence corrected her instantly. "And there is one more document in that folder. It is the absolute, irrefutable proof of your perjury. We pulled the security footage from the exact day and time you claimed I physically assaulted you in our home. The cameras clearly show I was miles away at my architecture firm sitting in a recorded client meeting. You walked into a family court, lied to a judge under oath, and filed a fabricated domestic violence restraining order just to steal my company assets." Sydney's friends physically recoiled from her, scooting their chairs backward to distance themselves from a proven fraud. "I am taking the house," Terrence continued, his voice ringing with triumph. I am taking every single dime you have left in your personal accounts to cover the stolen retainer. You are legally, financially, and socially ruined, Sydney. You have absolutely nothing left. Terence turned his back on her, walking away without a single ounce of hesitation. He returned to my side on the stage, taking his place as my loyal ally. Sydney collapsed into hysterical sobbing, burying her face in her hands, as her entire fraudulent existence burned to the ground in front of the city's most powerful elite. The toxic family was completely defeated. The toxic family was completely defeated. The grand ballroom, which just moments ago had been a glowing monument to their fabricated empire, rapidly transformed into a hollow tomb of absolute social ruin. The elite investors and wealthy socialites did not simply walk toward the exits, they fled. They grabbed their expensive coats, practically running over each other to escape the radioactive fallout of my public revelation. Nobody wanted their name associated with a family that had conspired to legally murder their own daughter for a real estate cash grab. The string quartet packed up their instruments and vanished. The catering staff quietly backed through the kitchen doors. Within 10 minutes, the massive hall was entirely empty, save for the echoes of shattering crystal and the pathetic, ragged breathing of the three criminals left standing on the stage. Harrison remained on his knees, his expensive custom tuxedo clinging to his trembling frame. He looked out at the empty room, his eyes wide and vacant, unable to process the absolute totality of his destruction. His construction company, his social standing, his entire carefully curated identity had been systematically dismantled and incinerated in front of his peers. Diane collapsed beside him, her emerald gown pooling around her on the polished wood. Sydney sat completely paralyzed in the front row, clutching the manila folder containing her divorce papers and the undeniable proof of her federal perjury. Silent tears ruined her flawless makeup. They had nothing left. Seeing that their financial and legal avenues were completely obliterated, they resorted to the only weapon they had left. The classic, pathetic manipulation of blood ties. Harrison slowly lifted his head, his face slick with sweat and tears. He reached out a shaking hand toward me. "Naomi, please." Harrison begged, his voice cracking into a desperate whine. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot take everything we have built. We were just trying to save the family legacy. We are your parents. We gave you life." Diane crawled forward on her knees, reaching out to grasp the hem of my tailored trousers. Terence immediately stepped forward, placing his polished shoe firmly between my mother and my leg, forcing her to shrink back. "Please, my baby," Diane sobbed, her face twisted in a mask of manufactured agony. "You have to forgive us. We are a family. We are your blood. You cannot send your own mother and father to federal prison. We love you." Sydney finally found her voice, dropping the folder and running toward the edge of the stage. She looked up at Terence, then at me, her eyes pleading. "Naomi, tell him to stop the lawsuit." Sydney cried out, her voice echoing shrilly in the empty hall. "Tell him to take me back. We are sisters. We share the same blood. You cannot let them ruin my life over a stupid mistake. We are family." I looked down at the three of them, feeling absolutely nothing. There was no sadness, no pity, and no lingering anger. The emotional cord that had tied me to these toxic people had been completely severed the moment I woke up in that hospital bed. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking directly into my father's desperate eyes, then my mother's, and finally my sister's. Blood does not sign a do not resuscitate order while their daughter is still breathing. I stated, my voice echoing with crushing absolute finality. Blood does not sell their child's life to pay for country club dues. Blood does not frame an innocent man for domestic violence just to steal his corporate retainer. You are not my family. You are simply the people who happen to share my genetics, and you weaponize that biological coincidence to try and murder me for profit. I am accelerating the debt tonight. The foreclosure notices will be posted on your front door by morning. I turned my back on them. I did not wait to hear their continued begging. Terence walked shoulder to shoulder with me, our footsteps echoing in perfect unison, as we crossed the massive empty ballroom. We pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and walked out into the cool, liberating night air, leaving them to burn in the ashes of their own greed. The aftermath was swift and merciless. By the end of the month, federal authorities moved in. Harrison and Diane were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and medical manipulation. The FBI matched the digital footprint of their bribes, and the corrupt doctor testified against them for a plea deal. They were both sentenced to federal prison, their entire estate liquidated to pay restitution to the banks and the hospital they defrauded. Sydney did not fare any better. Terrence finalized the divorce, winning absolute control over their marital assets. Sydney was convicted of perjury and financial embezzlement. Avoiding jail time by turning state's evidence against her parents, she was left to survive in ruins. She currently works a minimum wage retail job, ringing up groceries while the state garnishes 70% of her meager wages to repay Terrence. Her elite friends blocked her number, and she lives in a cramped apartment. As for me, I am sitting on the back porch of the very house they tried to steal. The morning sun is bright and warm. Terrence sits across from me reviewing blueprints for his latest commercial architecture contract. He rebuilt his firm, and I secured my corporate empire. We drink our coffee in peaceful, comfortable silence. We are not bound by blood, but we forged a new chosen family built on loyalty, trust, and impenetrable iron boundaries. Sometimes the most beautiful life begins the exact moment you walk away from the people who were supposed to love you. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found strength in this journey, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video. Please let me know in the comments how you set boundaries with toxic people. The gripping saga of Naomi and her ruthless family teaches a profound and often painful lesson. Biology does not automatically guarantee loyalty, love, or safety. For too long, society has pushed the narrative that blood is thicker than water, conditioning individuals to endure unacceptable toxic behavior simply because it comes from close relatives. Naomi's harrowing story completely shatters that dangerous illusion, proving that shared genetics can sometimes mask the most dangerous predators. When Naomi woke up in the ICU to discover her parents had signed a DNR and liquidated her assets, she faced the ultimate betrayal. Her parents and sister saw her not as a cherished human being, but as a disposable financial asset to exploit for their own reckless greed. It is a terrifying realization that the people expected to protect you can sometimes be the very ones meticulously plotting your downfall. However, Naomi's response provides the most empowering takeaway. Instead of yielding to the manipulative guilt trips of, "We are family," she relied on her own independence, intellect, and the support of Terrence, a true ally who proved his unwavering worth through action rather than mere genetics. The core lesson here is the absolute necessity of establishing ironclad boundaries. We must relentlessly protect our mental, emotional, and financial well-being from toxic individuals, regardless of their official title in our family tree. Naomi's ultimate victory was not just reclaiming her wealth, but cutting the toxic cord entirely to build a chosen family grounded in genuine mutual respect. Walking away from toxic relatives is never an act of cruelty. It is a vital act of self-love and survival. If this message resonates with your own journey of healing, please share this reflection and comment below on how you set boundaries to protect your peace